Congratulations, Margaret. That's what everyone kept saying that evening, their voices bouncing around the hotel ballroom like confetti I didn't ask for. At 72, after nearly 5 decades of teaching English in the same public school system, I was finally retiring. My colleagues had organized the event, but I knew most of the smiles belonged to family who were more interested in what came next: my pension, my savings, my small but well-kept house on Maple Avenue. The room smelled of champagne and roses. A string quartet played softly near the corner, though their notes were nearly drowned out by laughter and chatter. I stood near the long table draped in white cloth, lined with crystal glasses, silver platters of hors d'oeuvres, and 3 enormous cakes decorated with piped frosting spelling "Happy Retirement, Mrs. Campbell." My late husband, Richard, would have loved this. He always said he couldn't wait for the day I finally slowed down. But he wasn't here. He'd been gone 7 years, and it was just me, and the family who had learned to smile at me while plotting behind my back. I saw my daughter Emily, flitting from table to table, her silk dress catching the light, a champagne flute in her hand. She looked proud, but it wasn't pride in me. No, I knew Emily. Her eyes always darted toward her husband, Mark. My son-in-law. My biggest mistake wasn't teaching for too long or working myself ragged. My biggest mistake was trusting Mark. Mark was the kind of man who charmed everyone within minutes. Tall, athletic, with slicked-back blonde hair and an expensive navy suit that fit him like it was custom-tailored. He smiled with teeth too white to be real, laughed too loud at jokes he didn't find funny, and shook hands like every interaction was a business transaction. He had a way of leaning close when people spoke, nodding as if their words were the most important thing in the world. And yet, behind those rehearsed gestures, I had seen the real him. Arrogant. Careless. Greedy. Richard had warned me, back when he was alive. He didn't trust Mark. "That boy's eyes are always measuring Maggie," he'd say. "Not just Emily, not just the house, everything. He looks at you like you're a puzzle he wants to solve, and own." I brushed it off then. Emily was in love, and I didn't want to cause tension. But standing in that ballroom, watching Mark scan the crowd with the same calculating smirk, I felt Richard's warning settle in my chest like a stone. I had been holding a glass of sparkling cider, not champagne. Everyone assumed I couldn't drink because of my blood pressure, a convenient lie I let them believe. Truth was, I liked to keep my head clear. Too many secrets floated around in families, and I had learned you needed a sharp mind to catch the whispers people thought you were too old to hear. It was when I set my glass down for a moment, to hug a former student who had come to surprise me, that I saw it. Mark. He was standing right beside the table, looking crisp and polished, his smile plastered on as he chatted with a colleague of mine. But his hand wasn't idle. While nodding politely at the conversation, his other hand slid toward my cider glass. Quick. Precise. Too precise. My stomach tightened. He tilted his wrist just slightly, and I caught the glint of something small metallic between his fingers, like a vial or capsule. With a subtle flick, he dropped it into the golden liquid. No one else noticed. The room was too busy clapping as the principal toasted me from across the hall. But I noticed. I froze. The world seemed to blur around me. My ears rang with the sound of blood rushing. I stared at that glass, bubbles still rising as if nothing had happened. My heart hammered against my ribs. What was it? A sedative? A poison? Something to embarrass me? And then, like a film reel unspooling in my mind, I remembered whispers I'd overheard weeks earlier. Emily on the phone, pacing the living room. "Yes, once she's settled, we can manage everything," she had said. "Mark knows what to do." I had pretended to be asleep in the armchair, the glow of the TV flickering, but every word had burned into me. Now here I was, staring at the evidence of a plan. My son-in-law had tried to spike my drink at my own retirement party. I didn't move immediately. You learn something after 70 years, reaction is the enemy. Silence is your friend. I forced a smile at the student hugging me, thanked him for coming, and turned back toward the table as if nothing were wrong. Mark had drifted away, laughing with another group, Emily glowing by his side. I slid my cane closer to my chair, steadied myself, and picked up the glass. Not the one he touched. Oh no. I picked up the champagne glass beside it, the one I knew belonged to Mark. His laughter carried across the room as I swirled the golden liquid, studying the reflection of the chandelier above. My hand didn't tremble. Not once. For a moment, I considered dumping the tainted cider into the nearest plant. But then I thought of Richard. Of how he had always said I was too forgiving. "Don't let people walk all over you, Maggie," he'd warned. "You're stronger than you think." He was right. So instead, I left the cider exactly where it was, bubbles still rising with whatever poison Mark had added. And when the moment came, when Mark raised his voice to toast me and everyone gathered around the table, I acted. He reached for his glass. His glass. The champagne I had picked up moments earlier. "Here, Mark," I said sweetly, my voice calm and steady. "Why don't you join me in this toast? After all, you've been such a support to Emily during these years." The words dripped with a sweetness no one else could hear the venom in. Emily beamed. Mark, smug as ever, didn't hesitate. He clinked his glass against mine, oblivious, and drank. My heart pounded. Would he notice? Would the taste give him away? Or would he smile, as he always did, convinced he had outsmarted everyone? The night blurred on. Music swelled, people laughed, and speeches continued. But my eyes never left him. And as the minutes ticked by, I began to see it. The shift. The way his posture slouched just slightly. The sheen of sweat appearing along his temple. The faint flicker of confusion in his smile. And that was only the beginning. The ballroom glowed golden under the chandeliers, but my eyes stayed fixed on Mark. He was laughing too loudly at something one of my colleagues said, dabbing his forehead with a folded napkin as if the room were suddenly too warm. Everyone else sipped champagne, nibbled appetizers, and clapped at the speeches, but I couldn't hear the words anymore. My focus narrowed to him, the man who had just swallowed his own trick. He kept glancing down at his glass, as if unsure why it tasted different. His confident smirk had begun to slip. I watched him shift his weight from foot to foot, his tie pulled loose as he coughed into his hand. Emily noticed, of course, but she brushed it off with that impatient roll of her eyes. To her, Mark was invincible. Untouchable. She didn't see what I saw, the cracks in his armor. It took everything in me not to smile. I clutched my cane with one hand and lifted my cider, the untouched, poisoned one, with the other, pretending to sip as people toasted me again. No one knew. Not one of them suspected. My son-in-law had wanted to make me the fool. Instead, he had played himself. But I knew better than to think this was over. Not yet. The poison or sedative, whatever it was, didn't send him crashing to the floor. That would have been too obvious. He steadied himself, forcing a laugh, forcing that slick grin as if nothing were wrong. But his eyes, oh, his eyes betrayed him. The glassiness, the faint unfocused darting, I knew. And I filed every detail away. By the time the string quartet played their final notes and the crowd began to thin, I had made up my mind. Tonight wasn't just my retirement. Tonight was the beginning of something else entirely. As the guests trickled out, I thanked each one with the gracious smile of a teacher used to keeping order even in chaos. Emily kissed my cheek, whispering how proud she was of me. She smelled of expensive perfume and champagne, her voice warm, her words hollow. Behind her, Mark stumbled slightly as he shook hands with the superintendent, covering it with a chuckle. When they finally left the ballroom, I stayed behind. I asked the caterer to pack a small plate of food, thanked the janitor, and waited until the lights dimmed. Then I picked up Mark's empty champagne glass with a napkin and tucked it carefully into my purse. Evidence. I didn't know what it would show, fingerprints, residue, something, but I wasn't about to leave it behind. By the time I got home, the house was silent except for the hum of the refrigerator. I locked the door, slid the chain in place, and sat at my kitchen table with the glass in front of me. My heart was steady, not racing, not afraid. I had been through worse in my life, losing Richard, raising Emily alone after his passing, working 60-hour weeks just to keep us afloat. This wasn't fear. This was war. The next morning, I called an old friend. Detective Harold Whitmore. Retired now, like me, but still sharp. We had worked together on a community safety board years ago. He owed me a favor. "Margaret Campbell," he said, his voice gravelly with surprise. "Haven't heard from you in years. What's this about?" "I need to know what's in a drink," I said simply. There was a pause. Then a sigh. "You always did have a way of getting into messes, Maggie." "Fine. Bring it over." I drove across town with the glass wrapped in 2 napkins and sealed inside a freezer bag. Harold lived in a modest ranch house now, his police badge framed on the wall by the door. He didn't ask many questions, just raised his eyebrows when I handed him the evidence. "I'll call a guy I know," he muttered. "Quietly. You'll have an answer in a few days." "Harold," I said softly, "make sure it's off the record." He gave me a look, the kind only a man who'd seen too much could give. "You're playing with fire." "I've been burned before," I replied. On the drive home, the weight of it all pressed down. What kind of daughter had I raised? Emily was blind to her husband's greed, or worse, she shared it. I thought back to the whispered phone call I'd overheard. "Mark knows what to do." Did she know he meant to harm me? Or was she just willfully ignorant? That night, I couldn't sleep. I sat in Richard's old armchair, the leather cracked and worn, staring at the family photos on the mantel. Emily at her wedding, grinning like a princess. Mark at her side, grinning wider. Me standing between them, already uneasy but smiling for the camera. Richard's absence in that photo ached. He would have known how to handle this. He would have seen through Mark from the start. I whispered to the empty room, "I won't let him win, Richard. I promise." Days passed. Emily called once, asking if I was resting after the party. Her voice was bright, too bright. She didn't ask about the drink. She didn't ask if I noticed Mark nearly collapsing by the end of the night. No, she only asked if I had thought about plans for the future. Her words lingered, like she was already circling what was mine. Then, Harold called. "Maggie," he said, his voice lower than usual. "You were right to bring me that glass. There was residue of zolpidem in it." "Zolpidem?" I asked. "Sleeping pills. Strong dose. Enough to knock you out cold if you'd finished it. You'd have been groggy, confused, maybe even hospitalized. And if someone wanted to take advantage while you were out of it, you wouldn't have been able to stop them." I gripped the phone tighter. "So it wasn't meant to kill me?" "No. Just silence you." My mind spun. Mark didn't want me dead, not yet. He wanted me helpless. Vulnerable. Easy to manipulate. And if Emily was in on it, then together they'd gain control of everything, the pension, the accounts, the house. That realization didn't break me. It hardened me. "Harold," I said quietly, "I need you to keep this to yourself. Not a word to anyone." "You planning something?" he asked. I didn't answer. I didn't need to. Because in that moment I knew. Mark thought he'd set a trap for me at my retirement party. But what he didn't know was that I had already begun setting one for him. When you spend your life teaching, you learn patience. You learn to watch a child scribble the wrong answer 3 times before gently guiding them toward the truth. You learn to sit in silence until they discover it themselves. That's how I felt as I began watching Mark. He thought he was clever, but I had raised a classroom full of clever liars. None of them ever fooled me for long. After Harold's call about the zolpidem, I began my own quiet routine. I woke early, walked around the neighborhood, waved to the mailman, and kept up appearances. But beneath the surface, I was planning. Every move Mark made, I observed. Every word Emily spoke, I weighed. The first test came one Sunday afternoon. Emily invited me over for dinner, a gesture that almost sounded innocent. But the moment I walked into their house, I knew something was off. Emily wore a cream blouse and pearls, her blonde hair pinned neatly. She moved around the kitchen like she was auditioning for a cooking show, chirping about how good it was to have me there. Mark sat at the table in a pressed shirt, sleeves rolled up, sipping a beer with a grin that was too wide. "Mom," Emily said brightly, "Mark and I were just talking about how you might need some help with paperwork. You know, bills, accounts, all those things. It can be overwhelming now that you're retired." I set my cane against the table and lowered myself into the chair, keeping my face calm. "Is that so?" Mark leaned forward, resting his elbows on the polished wood. "Exactly. I work in finance, after all. Wouldn't want you to stress about managing all that money. You should be enjoying yourself." I smiled politely. "And you'd help me how?" He shrugged, casual. "Just a few signatures here and there. Power of attorney, nothing major. That way if anything happens, Emily and I can step in. Keep things running smoothly." I sipped the water Emily had poured me. My pulse stayed steady. "You're right, Mark," I said softly. "I probably should get my affairs in order." Emily's eyes lit up. Mark leaned back in satisfaction. But what they didn't know was that I had already met with Harold again, and then with a lawyer of my own. I had quietly moved my accounts into a trust with conditions Mark couldn't touch. The paperwork was ironclad. I wasn't their naive target anymore. That night, after I returned home, I pulled Richard's old journal from the shelf. He used to write down everything: stock notes, saving strategies, even little reminders about which neighbor owed him a wrench. I flipped through the pages, his neat handwriting steady even in his last years. One line caught me: "Control is not about holding tighter, Maggie. It's about knowing when to release without fear." Release. That's when I decided I wouldn't just defend myself. I'd turn their greed into their downfall. The next week, I pretended to falter. I left a bank statement accidentally visible on my kitchen counter when Emily visited, one that hinted at a large CD maturing soon. I sighed dramatically, muttering about how I wasn't sure what to do with it. Emily's eyes flickered like a spark catching dry leaves. She tried to hide her interest, but I saw it. The following Friday, I hosted them for dinner at my place. I wore a soft cardigan, my gray hair tied back simply, and played the part of the tired old woman. Between bites of roast chicken, I mentioned almost casually, "I've been thinking maybe I should just leave everything to Emily. After all, who else is there?" Mark's fork froze mid-air. Emily's eyes darted to his. He recovered quickly, laughing. "Well, Margaret, that's very generous. But let's not rush. These things need planning." I hid my smile by sipping tea. Every trap begins with bait. The days grew into weeks, and I watched as they leaned further into their fantasy. Emily dropped hints about home renovations, "when we have more space." Mark asked me, with false concern, if I had considered moving into a retirement community. They circled me like vultures, believing I was one step from crumbling. One night, unable to sleep, I sat by the window and whispered into the dark, "Richard, they think I'm weak. They think I've lost my edge. But they're wrong." The moonlight fell across my lap, silver and steady. For the first time in months, I felt peace. Because I finally knew what came next. The opportunity arrived faster than I expected. Mark called me one morning, his voice syrupy. "Margaret, I've been working on some investment options for you. Really safe, high return. You'd hardly have to lift a finger." Safe, high return. I almost laughed. The oldest scam in the book. "Why don't you come by?" I said sweetly. "Explain it over coffee." When he arrived that afternoon, wearing his expensive watch and that same smug grin, I had already set the stage. A folder sat on the table, papers neatly stacked. Of course, they weren't what he thought, but they looked like account statements. He leaned over eagerly, scanning the numbers, his pupils dilating as if he'd struck gold. "Margaret," he said, lowering his voice, "with a little movement, we could triple this. But I'd need temporary authorization to shift things around." I tapped the papers with my finger. "Is that so?" "Yes," he said smoothly. "It's simple. I can draw up the form tonight." I leaned back in my chair, studying him the way I once studied cheating students. His confidence, his eagerness, his hunger. He didn't see me anymore, just dollar signs. And that's when I knew I had him. Because while he was busy plotting his temporary authorization, I was already drafting my own plan with Harold and my lawyer. A plan that would not only expose Mark but also test Emily's loyalty. Would my daughter choose her mother, or the man she married? The answer, I suspected, would break what little heart I had left. But it would also set me free. By the time autumn painted the trees with fire-colored leaves, my plan was nearly ready. I moved through my days quietly, smiling at neighbors, attending church, buying groceries. To the outside world, I was just Margaret Campbell, the retired schoolteacher learning to enjoy her golden years. But beneath the calm surface, every step I took was deliberate. Mark thought I was drifting into dependence. Emily thought she was keeping me company out of kindness. They didn't realize they were walking right into the trap I had set. The key was patience. I let Mark talk. I let him imagine himself clever. Over dinners, he spoke casually about investments, sliding words like transfer, authorization, and liquidity into conversations as though they were harmless. Emily would nod along, sipping her wine, convinced her husband was brilliant. One evening, as I served apple pie at my kitchen table, Mark leaned in with a folded document. "Margaret," he said smoothly, "this is just a preliminary form. Nothing binding. Think of it as me being able to help in case of emergencies." I studied him, fork poised in midair. "Emergencies?" He smiled, showing too many teeth. "Yes. Suppose you forget a payment. Or suppose you fall ill. Emily and I could step in, protect your assets." I set the fork down gently. "That sounds responsible." His eyes gleamed. Emily touched his arm proudly. But what they didn't know was that my attorney had already prepared documents of my own, documents that made it appear as though I had consolidated everything into a single vulnerable account. In truth, my funds were locked tight in a trust beyond their reach. What they would see was bait. The real test would come at Thanksgiving. I decided to host it at my house, just as I had for decades. The dining room, with its oak table polished until it gleamed, would become the stage. My guests would be few, Emily and Mark of course, but also Harold, my retired detective friend, who would come under the guise of an old colleague. And finally, Mrs. Dalton, my neighbor, who loved nothing more than to gossip. I wanted witnesses. When the day arrived, the house smelled of turkey and rosemary, pies cooling on the counter, candles flickering in the windows. I wore a soft emerald dress with my silver hair pinned neatly back, looking every bit the doting grandmother. Emily arrived in a burgundy sweater, cheeks flushed from the chill. Mark followed, carrying a bottle of wine, his grin smug as ever. "Mom, this looks wonderful," Emily said, hugging me tightly. Her words were warm, but her eyes flickered toward the head of the table where I had placed a small leather folder. I smiled. "I'm glad you're here." Harold came next, dressed plainly in a wool coat, his handshake firm. Emily barely noticed him. Mark gave him a polite nod. Mrs. Dalton arrived last, chattering about her cats, her eyes darting over every detail in the room. "We sat down," said Grace, "and began to eat." Laughter filled the air, but beneath it I could feel the current of tension. Mark kept glancing at that folder as though it were a pot of gold. Halfway through dessert, I pushed the folder toward the center of the table. The leather gleamed in the candlelight. "I've been thinking," I said softly, "about what you suggested, Mark. About letting someone help with my accounts. I know I'm not as sharp as I used to be." Emily's fork clattered against her plate. Mark's hand twitched. "That's very wise of you, Mom," Emily said quickly. "It's the right thing to do." Mark nodded eagerly. "Absolutely. We just want to take care of you." I opened the folder slowly, revealing the documents inside. "I had my lawyer draft these. It would give you temporary access. Just in case." Mark's face flushed with triumph. He reached for the pen I had placed beside the folder. "We can take care of this right now." "Wait." My voice was calm but firm. Every eye at the table turned toward me. "If you're going to sign," I continued, "then we should all be clear about what this means. Harold here, he's an old friend, used to work with the police. He can witness it." Mark hesitated, but only for a second. His greed was stronger than his caution. He forced a smile. "Of course. That's fine." He picked up the pen and began to scrawl his name across the line. Emily watched, her hands clasped tightly in her lap, her face pale but expectant. As soon as the ink dried, Harold cleared his throat. "Interesting signature, Mr. Edwards. I wonder if it will hold up in court." Mark froze. "What do you mean?" Harold leaned forward. "Because what you've just signed isn't what you think. This isn't power of attorney. This is a statement of attempted financial coercion. Witnessed, dated, and now in my possession." Emily's mouth fell open. Mrs. Dalton gasped so loudly I thought she might choke on her pie. Mark's face drained of color. What are you talking about?" I folded my hands neatly. "You see, Mark, I knew what you were planning from the beginning. The drink at my retirement party. The late-night whispers. The endless talk about managing my assets. I let you walk right into this." He sputtered, his confidence gone. This is entrapment." Harold shook his head. "No, son. This is protection. You tried to manipulate a vulnerable adult. And now it's documented. Emily's eyes darted between us, panic setting in. Mom, you can't do this. I didn't do this, I interrupted coldly. You did when you chose to betray me. The silence that followed was heavier than stone. Mark shoved back his chair, his face twisted with rage. You'll regret this, old woman. I stood slowly, my cane steady in my hand. No, Mark. You'll regret underestimating me. Emily's eyes filled with tears, but I saw no remorse there. Only fear of losing what she thought was hers. They stormed out of the house, leaving their plates half-eaten. Mrs. Dalton leaned back in her chair, wide-eyed. Well, she said finally, that'll give me something to talk about at church. Harold gave me a small nod. You handled that better than I could have. But I wasn't done. That night, as I washed the dishes, my hands steady, I whispered to Richard's photograph on the mantel. They think they've lost tonight. They don't know yet how much more they're about to lose. Because signing that false document was just the first step. The real reckoning was still to come. And I would be ready. The night after Thanksgiving, I sat alone at my kitchen table. The dishes were clean, the candles blown out, but the echoes of what had happened lingered like a storm that hadn't yet passed. Mark's face when Harold revealed the truth replayed in my mind, the arrogance melting into panic, the red creeping up his neck, the desperation in his voice. And Emily's expression, that one hurt the most. My own daughter's eyes filled not with loyalty, but with fear of losing what she thought she was entitled to. I sipped my tea and whispered to Richard's picture on the mantel. It's not finished. But it will be. The next morning, I met Harold at his small office on Main Street. The place smelled faintly of old coffee and lemon polish. He closed the door behind me and laid the folder on his desk. Inside was the document Mark had signed, his scrawled name a monument to his own greed. Harold tapped it with one finger. This is gold, he said. But are you ready for what comes next? If you file this, it won't just be between you and him. It'll be public. I looked him straight in the eye. I've spent my whole life protecting my reputation. Now it's time I protect myself. Let the truth come out. He nodded, respect flickering in his eyes. Then we'll take it to your lawyer first thing Monday. That weekend, the house was quiet, but my phone wasn't. Emily called, then texted, then called again. Her messages grew more frantic. Mom, we need to talk. It's not what you think. Please don't do anything rash. I ignored them all. By Monday, I was sitting in my lawyer's office downtown. Mrs. Kent was sharp, with cropped gray hair and glasses perched low on her nose. She read the document carefully, then sat back in her chair. This, she said, tapping the signature line, is enough to pursue legal action for attempted financial exploitation. With Harold as a witness, it's airtight. I breathed slowly, letting her words sink in. But I don't just want punishment. I want them stripped of the power they thought they had. I want this to end completely. Mrs. Kent smiled faintly. Then we don't just go to the police. We go to the financial board. Mark works in investments, doesn't he? We let his own industry handle him first. Nothing ruins a man like losing his license. The idea settled into me like a stone sinking into water. Final. I nodded. We filed the report that afternoon. The following days passed like the slow build of thunder. I went about my routines, morning walks, reading in the evenings, making soups as the weather turned colder. Outwardly, I looked calm. Inwardly, I waited. And then it came. On Thursday morning, Harold called. His voice was steady, almost satisfied. Margaret, they opened the investigation. Mark's firm has been notified. He's been suspended pending review. I gripped the phone tighter. Already? Yes. Word travels fast when it comes to financial misconduct. And once this document is reviewed, he trailed off, but I didn't need him to finish. Later that same day, Emily appeared at my doorstep. Her hair was unbrushed, her face pale, her eyes rimmed with tears. Mom, she whispered, please? Can we talk? I hesitated, then stepped aside. She entered slowly, like a child sneaking into a classroom after breaking the rules. She sat at my kitchen table, twisting her wedding ring nervously. I didn't know he was going to do that, she began. The drink at your party. I swear, I didn't. But, when he told me later it was just something mild to make you drowsy, I believed him. I didn't want to think he was capable of worse. I studied her face. My daughter, my only child. I wanted to believe her. But the memory of her pale, eager smile when Mark talked about power of attorney burned in my mind. You stood by him, I said quietly. You let him treat me like a prize to be won, a wallet to be emptied. You knew, Emily. Maybe not the details. But you knew. Her chin trembled. I thought if I just kept quiet, it would all work out. That maybe you'd hand things over willingly, and there wouldn't be a fight. I leaned forward, my voice sharper than I intended. And did you ever stop to think what that would do to me? To watch my own daughter and her husband erase me while I was still alive. Tears spilled down her cheeks. She reached across the table, but I didn't move. I was wrong, Mom. I see that now. Please, don't destroy him. He'll lose everything. I sat back slowly. Emily, he tried to drug me. He tried to steal my life's work. And you're asking me to protect him. She sobbed quietly, her shoulders shaking. I just don't want to lose you. Her words pierced me, but they were too late. Then you should have remembered that before you chose him over me. The silence that followed was heavier than stone. Emily finally stood, wiping her face with the back of her hand. She opened her mouth to say something, but no words came. She walked out the door, and for the first time in my life, I didn't stop her. The weeks that followed were brutal, for them, not for me. Mark's firm released a statement about serious ethical violations. His name vanished from their website. Clients pulled accounts. His license was suspended indefinitely. Gossip spread like wildfire through the community. Words like fraud, exploitation, and elder abuse clung to him like stains he couldn't wash away. Emily moved back into their house, but I heard from neighbors that the tension was unbearable. She no longer wore her ring. Mark stopped showing his face in public. The empire they thought they would inherit had crumbled before their eyes. And me? I flourished. With my assets safe and my independence secured, I decided to put my resources where they mattered. I met with Mrs. Kent and Harold again, and together we drafted a plan for a small foundation in Richard's name, scholarships for older women starting second careers. At the launch event in January, I stood at the podium in the community center, wearing a deep navy dress, my silver hair brushed back, my cane steady at my side. The room was filled with women of all ages, neighbors, former students, even a few reporters. I spoke calmly, my voice steady. When someone tries to silence you, the best revenge is not anger. It's building something they can never take away. This foundation isn't about what I lost. It's about what we can create together. The applause washed over me like sunlight. Later, as I walked home in the crisp evening air, I felt Richard's presence beside me. I whispered into the night, "We did it, love." They tried to erase me. But instead, I wrote the ending myself. And that was the sweetest revenge of all. Thanks for staying with me till the end. Ever faced something like this? Drop your story below. Your words might help someone else. Don't forget to subscribe, more real stories are on the way.